As part of Ultra Ireland supports on rebooting international B2B business, this video gives practical advice on pricing and contracting for international B2B sales channels. Before watching this video, we recommend that you download the PowerPoint presentation that accompanies it. The format for this video will follow the 5 key topics outlined here. Let's begin by considering the role of price when bringing saleable experiences to market. To note that a saleable experience defines experiences and services that are complete, fully priced, ready and available to bring to market for sale by a tourism business. Here, we see some examples of saleable experiences that are brought to market by diverse tourism businesses, including activity providers, visitor attractions, and accommodation providers. And of course, there are lots of accommodation providers that offer their own innovative on-site experiences now. I will leave you to read this example of a saleable experience entitled Seaweed Walk, Talk and Taste. As you can see, the experience is fully crystallized with clearly defined parameters, including duration and the minimum maximum number of people that apply to this experience. The retail price, which happens to be blanked out in this example, has clearly itemized price inclusions. In this way, the full value of the price offering is clearly understood. When pricing experiences, there are 3 important factors that must be considered. Firstly, there is the full value of the saleable experience itself. Then there is the price that applies to that saleable experience. In this regard, I will show you later how a tourism business must give due consideration to the retail price, the break-even price, and the B2B buyer price. For step-by-step instruction on calculating your retail rate and group rate pricing, which considers your cost of sale to determine your break-even point and profit margin, please take a look at the suite of supports on break-even and pricing for B2C and B2B, which includes a calculator and guidance note and an accompanying video. For now, let's start with price inclusions. A simple tip when pricing saleable experiences is to price and bullet point the inclusions. That way, the business is clear on the full value offered within the saleable experience price point. In turn, by preparing this way, the business can easily communicate the full value within the saleable experience so that this is clearly understood by the B2B travel buyer. Here we see the example of an overnight stay with an accommodation provider for the price of €100. Note how the inclusions are clearly outlined. In light of COVID-19, you can see that this business has also noted the additional inclusions of hand sanitizers in bedrooms and public areas. Through itemizing inclusions in this way, the tourism business makes the travel buyer aware of this added value within the price point, while at the same time reassuring the buyer that this tourism business intends to look after its customers' well-being. As you can see, this accommodation provider has also some fun inclusions for children and adults alike. Here we see how inclusions, including COVID-19 inclusions, might be itemized for an activity provider. And here we see how inclusions, including COVID-19 inclusions, might be itemized for a visitor attraction. In addition to mastering the skill of highlighting inclusions, including relevant COVID-19 inclusions, so that the full value is apparent to travel buyers, the tourism business needs to specifically address how to manage travel buyer pricing. Let's consider a visitor attraction or activity provider that charges a retail rate of €10 for a particular saleable experience. It would be most important that a tourism business like this has worked out its break-even price. In other words, the cost of providing this experience. To do this at this time, a tourism business should also factor in any COVID-19 related costs. Let's just say that once this visitor attraction or activity provider has completed this task, the break-even point is €5. At €5, the business is only covering its costs, for example, staff and utility costs. Between €6 and €10, the business is making money. A business might therefore decide that price points between €6 and €9 can be considered for travel buyer pricing. The same principle applies to accommodation providers. However, as the cost of a bedroom is likely to be higher, this is illustrated here via a price point of €100. For this example, the break-even point for the accommodation provider is defined as €50. And this fictional business therefore decides that a price point between €60 and €90 can be considered for travel buyers. It is also important to note that in the case of visitor attractions and activity providers, it can be very important to link the retail price to a certain number of people, defined as minimum numbers. For example, a foraging experience might charge €10. However, if one person books that experience, this foraging business is unlikely to make money. In this case, it would therefore be important to advise, for example, that the charge of €10 is subject to minimum 5 people, or the equivalent in fees for lower numbers. This pricing model is particularly important for smaller businesses when individuals are giving up their time and expertise to manage these bookings. If this applies to your business, it is very important to kindly and clearly deliver this kind of instruction regarding minimum numbers to a travel buyer. During the COVID-19 period, tourism business may now need to reconsider the minimum and maximum numbers that apply in light of COVID-19. It is most important that a tourism business knows if their break-even costs are covered in light of any adjustments made to that minimum number. As noted above, the gap between the retail price and the break-even price identifies the price points at which the tourism business can make money via travel buyer pricing. It is important to say that there are diverse kinds of saleable experiences. Let's take a standard 1-hour self-guided tour for a visitor attraction. This can be categorized as a general experience. General experiences tend to be at a lower price point. These are the kind of experiences that a tourism business often sells the most. Premium experiences are higher end and tend to be delivered by experts. In the case of a garden visitor attraction, this experience might be delivered, for example, by a renowned horticulturalist. Usually, there is more room for margin in premium experiences as they appeal to customers with a higher budget or a special interest that matches the saleable experience on offer. During COVID-19, many businesses found new revenue generation opportunities by, for example, selling virtual experiences online. An example might include a cookery demonstration showing how to make brown bread that can be sold virtually in the global markets. Again, in this case, there tends to be more room for the business to make a margin. It is therefore advisable that the tourism business has a catalogue of diverse saleable experiences at diverse price points that they can bring to market to generate revenue. It would be very important to showcase the full suite of experiences that are relevant for global markets to a travel buyer. Here we see diverse travel buyers. I will leave it with you to read the details yourself. However, you can see that each buyer type is different, ranging from tour operators and high-volume travel wholesalers who engage in leisure tourism, to OTAs or online travel agents, and PCOs who are business tourism conference specialists. To note that the term DMC, meaning Destination Management Company, can apply to travel buyers who engage in both leisure and business tourism. Most importantly, a tourism business must always know and understand the buyer type it is engaging with, as each buyer type is different and may thereby manage, for example, pricing in different ways. It is also important to understand that some travel buyers engage in both leisure and business tourism. By knowing this, a tourism business could potentially create diverse revenue generation opportunities for itself. As advised, diverse travel buyers seek diverse pricing models. I will leave it with you to read the examples shown here in more detail. For now, I would like to highlight how tour operators tend to want what is called a discounted or net rate. So for example, if the public price is €10 for a saleable experience, the business might offer the tour operator a discounted rate of €8. Online travel agent buyers tend to request commissionable rates. So for example, if the retail rate is €10, a tourism business might offer the travel buyer 10 or 15% commission on this rate. In business tourism, for DMCs and PCOs, commissionable rates also tend to apply. However, in this case, the commission is allowable on the gross rate less the VAT. So now you see why it is so important for tourism businesses to understand which travel buyer type is a match for them and the rules for engaging with diverse travel buyer types so that conversions can be achieved. When quoting pricing to travel buyers, a tourism business should also indicate the VAT percentage that is included within the price point offered. Many tourism businesses like to show their pricing excluding VAT too, so that the VAT contribution is visible and clear to the travel buyer. Let's take a look now at how pricing can be specifically managed for a tour operator based on discounted or net pricing. On the basis of a saleable experience retailing at €10, a business might decide to create 3 tour operator price points. Please see this model, which we have created for illustrative purposes only. For this fictional business, the first price at €9 is offered to a travel buyer that has not delivered customers to the tourism business in the past and is likely to deliver a low level of bookings in the future. This business decides that €8 should apply to buyers who can deliver a medium level of bookings, and that €7 should apply to tour operators that can deliver a high level of business. Even before COVID-19, many tourism businesses decided on occasion to offer rates at their break-even point or a little above this, as we see in this example of a tourism business that accepts a high-volume travel buyer booking during a time when it most needs to cover the costs of running the business. When negotiating prices with B2B travel buyers during the COVID-19 period, this kind of thinking can be useful, as businesses will need to place a strong emphasis on covering and managing its costs due to social distancing restrictions and limitations on international travel. Now let's take a look at the management of rates for diverse travel buyer types. Here we see the example of Mount Congreve Gardens and how this visitor attraction saleable experiences have been itemised on a grid. This grid is very useful to both clarify the saleable experiences offered by the business and also to facilitate the creation of a simple buyer rate agreement. Here we note how a grid, like we just saw for Mount Congreve, has been pulled into a new rate agreement document entitled FIT and Ad hoc Group Rates 2020 and 2021. Note how on this grid there is an additional column that shows the buyer their special discounted rate for ad hoc and FIT bookings. Please note that the sample rate agreements template for attractions and activities can be located within the Rebooting International B2B Business Suite of supports. Of course, in light of COVID-19, it is very important for tourism businesses to ensure that saleable experiences and associated rate agreements are fully updated with, for example, revised minimum and maximum numbers according to government guidelines. Note how this rate agreement gives clear instruction on how the rates are to be used. The rate agreement also notes that it is subject to terms and conditions, and we will look at how to address those shortly. Some visitor attraction and accommodation provider businesses give a slightly different rate for FIT and ad hoc groups. In this case, the rate agreement as shown simply has two extra columns, one that notes the travel buyer's special FIT rate and one that notes the buyer's ad hoc group rate for each experience. Here we see a reminder of the kind of rate agreement template that an accommodation provider might use to outline their rates for travel buyers. It is recommended that accommodation providers review their current rate agreements and update any necessary changes before reissuing to the travel buyer. Please note that a sample rate agreement template for accommodation providers can also be located within the Rebooting International B2B Business Suite of supports. To note that this rate agreement template for accommodation providers makes provision for notes including the basis on which the rates are offered. Here, you can see a note that can be applied to travel buyer rates offered either on a discounted or net basis versus the wording to be used for rates offered on a commissionable basis. Here, we see how tourism businesses like visitor attractions or activity providers could create a rate agreement for a travel buyer who has requested a commissionable rate. Again, clear instruction regarding the application of rates is given, and the last column highlights the commission that applies. As business tourism inquiries happen on an ad hoc basis, rates and associated conditions are usually also advised based on the requirements of each inquiry. Here we see an example of an email sent by an accommodation provider outlining the rates, conditions and commission charges for a fictional business called Blake Banking. Note how the email clarifies that the commission is allowable on the rate excluding VAT. For the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic, a tourism business may wish to consider offering a business tourism travel buyer commission on the full gross amount as a thank you for the business and as a further incentive to book during this difficult time. Now let's take a look at considerations for contracting during the COVID-19 period. It is important to note that all travel buyers act as intermediaries between suppliers like tourism businesses and the travel buyers' end customers. Each travel buyer draws up their own contract for their end customer. this contract is informed by many factors, including the contractual conditions noted in the supplier's contract. For this reason, travel buyers sometimes need to negotiate all or some contractual conditions in supplier contracts to ensure greater alignment in the contracts delivered by the travel buyer to their end customers. In light of COVID-19, all tourism businesses will need to review contractual clauses. Please note that guidance notes on considerations for writing terms and conditions for B2B contracting can be located within this suite of supports. There is one for visitor attractions and activity providers, and there is another for accommodation providers. When reviewing contractual clauses, it is recommended to go through each clause individually, decide which clauses must remain, highlight any clauses that need revision. Clauses marked for revision are likely to include deposit schedules and cancellation policies. Take a look at this contractual clause that relates to VAT. To date, this clause has been relevant for accommodation providers, visitor attractions, and activity providers. Note that the clause instructs the buyer that if VAT is amended, that the price to the buyer will reflect that amendment. So, for example, if VAT were to reduce, this price reduction would need to be passed on to the travel buyer. Accordingly, any revised rates would need to be updated in all travel buyer rate agreements. Here we see a contractual clause created by an accommodation provider pre-COVID-19 informing travel buyers who do not have credit about payment conditions. These kind of clauses are likely to need a full review. Here you can see how this accommodation provider might revise this clause during this uncertain period of the COVID-19 crisis. In light of COVID-19 and the uncertainty that this crisis brings, your business may wish to consider a more flexible payment policy as written here. Now we see the contractual clause created by an accommodation provider pre-COVID-19 informing travel buyers about cancellation policies. And here we see how this clause might now be revised by the accommodation provider post-COVID-19 for FIT bookings. Next, we see how this clause might be revised by the accommodation provider for ad hoc group bookings. Here we see a clause that may have been used for activity providers and visitor attractions prior to COVID-19, informing travel buyers who do not have credit about payment conditions. And here we see how this same clause might change during the current times. Again here, we see a pre-COVID group cancellation policy for activity providers and visitor attractions prior to COVID-19. While here, we see how this policy has been softened in light of the current uncertainty. Finally, when making revisions to rate agreements and contractual clauses during a unique and uncertain time like the COVID-19 pandemic, it is advisable that a letter or email is drawn up to clarify the conditions under which these amendments are being made. When you read this text, you will see that this business has advised that the amended rate agreement and terms and conditions applies for the remainder of 2020 and into 2021, where the pandemic is likely to have an impact. You will note that the business has reserved the right to review, amend, and update the rate agreement and associated contractual clauses once this period is likely to have passed in 2022. Note how this instruction is couched in kind language, which is even more of a requirement at this sensitive time. Please note that the rate agreements and terms and conditions examples referenced in this video are located here on the Fáilte Ireland website. Thank you so much for watching, and I wish you every success in your preparations for engaging with B2B travel buyers.